The second escape room movie is hitting theaters. Maybe if they'd done a better job building the first escape room, then we wouldn't need this movie, right? Hello everybody and welcome to my review for Escape Room Tournament of Champions, just one of a few movies that are hitting theaters this weekend. Why am I reviewing this movie, you might say? Well, believe it or not, and you may not remember this, the first Escape Room was actually a pretty big hit. It was made for under $10 million. It made over $150 million worldwide. And when you have a movie like that was made for a low budget and made a lot of money back, there's one of two things you can do as a studio. You can pat yourselves on the back and say, hey, we did a great job on that movie, and take those tens of millions of dollars and go home. Or you can invest more money and try to milk even more out of what was already kind of a simple and somewhat tired concept to begin with. Guess which one they decided to go with? The director of the first Escape Room movie and also the last Insidious movie, Adam Robitel, comes back to helm this movie. And I was going back through the archives. I remember that I actually reviewed the first movie back when I was at Fandom. It was the very first movie that I reviewed back in 2019. And going back and looking at that review, I had to kind of refresh my mind even on what the movie was about. But I remembered looking at what I said then that the first Escape Room was, like I said, a somewhat simple premise. And the idea of an escape room, even at that time, had been around for quite some time. It already felt a little bit behind the beat, but looking back, that first movie also kept me engaged for a fair amount of the first 2/3. It just fell apart at the end as they tried to introduce this whole world building concept, and ultimately I didn't recommend the movie even though I'd found a lot in it that I liked. Well, first movie notwithstanding, we're back again with another one, and so are stars Taylor Russell and Logan Miller, who plays Zoe and Ben. They were the last two survivors of the previous escape room, spoiler alert, but then they find themselves having to navigate a new series of escape rooms with a group of previous escape room escapees. This is sort of like the quarter quell of escape rooms if you're into the Hunger Games. That's why they call it the Tournament of Champions. And yes, in case you're wondering, there is a title name drop in the first 15 minutes of the movie.
You guys have played the game before?
So what is this? Like a Tournament of Champions?
Usually when a movie is successful and it gets a sequel, that means they get more money and the sequel is bigger and sometimes better. And I guess Escape Room Tournament of Champions or Escape Room 2 is bigger in some ways, but it's definitely not better. And a lot of it has to do with the escape rooms because they are the centerpiece of the film. And there's a certain stepping up of visual effects, etc. They are bigger than the last ones, but I would argue that they're not better. I remember a few of the rooms from the last movie and I thought that they were way more visceral, way more terrifying. And even though they were simpler, they actually had more suspense embedded in them. I remember there was one that was just an upside down room and people were hanging from it. That was 5 times more suspenseful than any sequence that's in this movie. So even though the stakes are the same, if you don't escape the room, then you die, they're set up as these big, crazy death things, but none of them really ever pay off. And it's sort of just in the background. You know that if these characters don't get out that they're going to die, but most of the action is just watching them figure out the puzzles that you'd find in pretty much any escape room. And it's this quality that gives Escape Room Tournament of Champions the feel of just having to sit and watch people that you don't know solve puzzles for about an hour in an escape room that you can't participate in yourself, and then being asked to pay for it. It's kind of like if the movie Clue back in 1985, instead of being its own murder mystery, had brought all of those great characters to that old mansion, and then the movie was sitting there and watching them play the board game Clue. I'm sure the characters are probably having fun, and it's probably very important to them, but why am I watching this? There are some very clever things in these escape room puzzles, but the situations themselves really aren't that suspenseful, and it's really not that interesting just watching them solve 4 or 5 different sets of puzzles in succession, because that's really the plot of this movie. There's like 15 minutes of world building at the beginning and 15 minutes of world building at the end. If that, the movie's not even 90 minutes. And then the whole middle part of the movie is literally just a series of escape rooms that we go to one after the other and watch them try to figure it out. I didn't really find it that spellbinding. Now, you can't blame the movie for bad timing. The whole escape room phenomenon was big when the first movie came out. This movie was supposed to come out in much closer proximity to the other one. And even the idea of escape rooms themselves. None of us could ever have predicted a couple of years ago that the idea of jamming a bunch of your friends into a confined area together, most of whom probably came from out of town, and then spending a long time really in close contact with each other would have faced the challenges that we had in 2020 and going into 2021. So I can't lay the fact that escape rooms feel pretty irrelevant right now solely at the feet of the people who decided to make this movie. But I can lay plenty of other stuff at their feet, other than the fact that I didn't find the middle hour of the movie very interesting at all. Even the world building stuff that they try to do and this big vast conspiracy and the twists and turns there, none of that really holds up with 30 seconds of critical thinking. The order and how things could have been pulled off and where and why, if you give it even a moment's thought, none of it makes any sense whatsoever. So if you're hoping that at least you get some kind of a complicated or satisfying world building, you're going to leave with more questions than answers, and not in a good way. And then things even like the dialogue. The dialogue is basically filler. The dialogue is there because you can't have characters that just stand there silently while they solve puzzles. They have to actually say words, and the words are the things that they say in this film, but there's nothing that special about them. I didn't really care about any of these characters, and look, I get it. It's a horror movie. It's a horror movie aimed at teenagers, but that doesn't mean they should be insulted. It doesn't mean that just because the target market of a movie skews a little bit younger that we shouldn't whip some good dialogue or a good character or a sensible plot at them. We want to give all audiences good movies, right? There's one point where one of the characters actually can't feel pain, and she's talking to the other characters, and she says, well, you know, all of you went through the different escape rooms with your different groups. I was in a group full of people that were just like me that couldn't feel pain. Can you imagine the crazy traps that they set for us? I wish that I didn't have to imagine that. I actually wanted them to just continue that conversation because it sounded 10 times more interesting than anything that had happened in this movie. I wish that they'd made that film because that's an interesting concept. What we're watching is not an interesting concept, and it's not really treated like it is one. One of the biggest things this movie has going against it, and it's a problem that the first movie had as well, is the rating. This is rated PG-13 because it's obvious that they want a big opening weekend. They want a wide audience to come in and spend their money on this film, but it conflicts with the core concept of the movie. You have these death traps, and they're set up to be really brutal. There's things that can slice and dice people, that can turn them into cubes, things that can, suffocate people, really horrific ways of dying. And yet, because of the PG-13 rating, the movie really can't show any of it. So there's some real horror type stuff, like body horror type stuff that's set up in the film, but then because of the restrictive rating, they can't really deliver on. And this is like trying to make the Final Destination movies PG-13 rated. The reason that the Final Destination movies did so well and that there were so many of them, I'll tell you this, it wasn't the plot. That wasn't why people kept on going to see those movies. They kept going to see the movies because they were inventively staged, because you would set the scene. It's similar in so many ways to Escape Room. You set the scene, you show what the stakes are, you hint at how all of these demises are going to happen. You have the audience sitting there waiting for it to happen, and then you dispatch these characters in a very brutal and just merciless way. That's the fun that people had with those movies. It wasn't about the plot. It wasn't about figuring out who and what and why is death doing this and all of this stuff. It was the fact that people wanted to go and see just how creative you could be in killing off a new set of characters in every movie. And I think if Escape Room had gone this direction, had gone the R-rated direction, it could have been a much more interesting movie, because at least all of these death traps that you set up in the film, you can pay them off. They can't do them in this movie. And it seems to me that the studios may be more interested in having the quick buck from the teen audience now and milking maybe 1 or 2 movies out of this than trying to build out the franchise with a more restrictive rating, but that would allow for more creative freedom in making these death scenes more impactful. I didn't recommend the first Escape Room movie, but I found a lot to like about it. I recommend this one less, and I found a lot less to like in the film itself. I'm sure that for some people it will be a nice distraction for a couple of hours, get out of the summer heat. This is only available in theaters, so for people that are looking for a movie that they can't watch at home, if there's a theater that's open and safe and you just want to literally sit there for 2 hours, I guess you could maybe do worse than this movie, but I didn't really find much appealing about it. The movie leaves things more than open to the fact that there could be a third one if this one's a success. It almost demands a third Escape Room movie, but that is also dependent on the movie doing well. And I think that given what I've seen, and given the fact that I think that there's a substantial drop down from the first movie to the second one, even though I didn't really love the first one at all either, I think a lot of fans, even of that first movie, might be looking for the exits before this one is over. One quick note, if you want to see the 2 young stars of this movie in much better movies, then you can see Taylor Russell, who plays Zoe, in a great movie called Waves, which was a criminally underseen and criminally underrecognized by the awards circuit movie that came out a couple years ago. And you can see Logan Miller in Love, Simon, which is one of my favorite teen-focused rom-coms that has come out in the last few years. And those are my thoughts on Escape Room Tournament of Champions. Like I said, this is just my first review of movies that are hitting theaters this weekend. I will be back either tonight or tomorrow morning with my thoughts on Space Jam: A New Legacy. I did not get a chance to see that film before it came out, so I will be heading to the theater today and watching that one and bringing you my thoughts. I'm looking forward to seeing that one as well. And then there are so many other great movies that are in theaters right now. I want to check out the new Nicolas Cage movie, Pig, maybe bring you a review for that. There's an Anthony Bourdain documentary that I want to check out. We're in the heart of the summer movie season, and there's lots of great options out there. I'm going to try to bring you reviews for as many of them as I can. Thank you so much for watching me here on the channel. If you want to see even more of what I'm up to, you can check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. And you can also check out my podcast, All My Movies. We just did one of my favorite Westerns, Tombstone, and this month we're just doing some of my favorite movies. So it's a great time to jump in if you haven't listened to All My Movies or watched it here on the channel. Thank you so much for watching this review. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you soon. Bye.